The morning light slipped through the faded curtains of a house that once held life, laughter, and love. Dust floated lazily in the beams of sunlight, settling on old photographs, cracked teacups, and the creaking wooden floor. Every corner whispered a memory, and every silence screamed the same truth. She was alone. Eleanor Hartley, 60 years old, sat by the window that faced her front yard. Her wrinkled hands rested on a half-knitted sweater, the same one she'd started 3 winters ago for her youngest grandson. But he had outgrown sweaters, outgrown bedtime stories, outgrown her. The yarn now hung loose, tangled like the pieces of her heart she no longer had the strength to fix. Outside, the world moved on, neighbors rushing to work, children running to school, cars passing by. But inside, time had stopped. The clock on the wall ticked faintly, but it felt more like a reminder than a rhythm. Every sound in that house echoed loneliness. The creak of the floorboard, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft sighs of a woman who had given everything and received nothing in return. Eleanor's eyes drifted to the family pictures on the mantel. There was her husband smiling proudly with his arm around her the day they bought this house. There were her children, 3 of them, each frozen in a moment when they still needed her. Christmas mornings, birthdays, school plays, the frames captured joy, but behind each was a story of sacrifice. She remembered the nights she stayed awake when they were sick, the mornings she worked double shifts, the time she hid her hunger so they could eat more. Now those same children lived in other cities, other lives, where she was a ghost, acknowledged only through occasional phone calls that ended too quickly with promises they never kept. "Mom, I'll visit soon," they said. "Maybe next month," they added. Months became years. Soon never came. The house itself seemed to grieve with her. The paint peeled off the walls like old skin. The kitchen table, once filled with chatter, now held a single plate and cup. The garden she used to tend with her husband had wilted into dry soil. Even the flowers had given up. But Eleanor had not always been this way. Once, she was the center of everyone's world, the one who fixed, fed, forgave, and forgot her own dreams to make others come true. People called her strong, but strength had become her curse. When her husband died 10 years ago, everyone said, "You're the strong one, you'll manage." And she did, because she had no choice. She managed the bills, the loneliness, the birthdays no one remembered. She managed it all, silently. That morning, as she poured herself a cup of lukewarm tea, she noticed the ring her husband had given her on their 25th anniversary. It no longer fit properly. Her fingers had thinned, just like her patience with life. She took the ring off and set it beside her cup, staring at it as if waiting for it to speak. But like everyone else, it stayed silent. Her phone lay on the counter. She looked at it, half hoping, half knowing it wouldn't ring. The last call she received was 2 weeks ago. A quick chat from her eldest daughter reminding her she was too busy these days. Busy with what? Eleanor wondered. With living? With forgetting. She thought about calling them herself. But then she remembered the tone in their voices when she did. That polite impatience, that forced warmth. The kind that made her feel like an obligation instead of a mother. So she didn't call. She simply sat there, clutching her cup, listening to the ticking clock, and pretending not to care. As afternoon light dimmed into dusk, she walked into the living room and turned on the old radio. The same station she and her husband used to dance to played softly, a love song from the 80s. She closed her eyes. For a moment, she could almost feel his hand on her waist, hear his laughter, smell the faint scent of aftershave. But when she opened her eyes, there was only empty space. A single tear rolled down her cheek, not from sadness, but from exhaustion. It was the kind of weariness that comes from being invisible in a world you helped build. She realized that she had spent her entire life raising others. Her children, her husband, even neighbors who needed her kindness. But no one had ever stopped to ask who she was when she wasn't needed. As the clock struck midnight, Eleanor blew out the candle beside her and whispered to herself, "Maybe tomorrow will be different." But deep down, she knew tomorrow would be the same, quiet, lonely, forgotten. The only difference was a new feeling that had begun to grow quietly inside her chest. It wasn't sadness this time. It wasn't longing either. It was something darker, something colder. A question that refused to die. If they could forget me so easily, why should I remember them with love? And that question, that single, silent spark, was where her story of revenge truly began. The next morning broke with a soft drizzle, the kind that blurs the line between sky and earth. Eleanor Hartley sat at her kitchen table, watching raindrops slide down the window like tears she no longer shed. The air smelled of damp soil and forgotten mornings. Her hands, veined and trembling, rested on the wooden surface. They had once been strong, the same hands that had built everything she ever loved, everything that had now left her behind. As the rain tapped against the glass, memories began to rise like mist. She saw herself at 22, a young wife with dreams stitched together by hope and hardship. Her husband, Robert, was kind but restless. He worked construction jobs that came and went, leaving months of struggle in between. It was Eleanor's hands that kept the household steady. She worked part-time at a bakery sewing clothes at night and still managed to cook clean and care for their newborn daughter, Lily. Those hands baked birthday cakes even when flour was scarce. They wiped tears, tied shoelaces, and pressed cool cloths against feverish foreheads. When her second child, Michael, was born, Eleanor had to stretch her love thinner, but somehow made it enough. And when the youngest, Anna, came unexpectedly 5 years later, everyone said she would break under the weight, but she didn't. She only learned to carry more. There was a photo on her wall of those early days, Robert holding baby Anna, Eleanor smiling in the background, flour dusting her cheeks. She had been exhausted, but she had never felt more alive. The laughter, the noise, the chaos. It was a symphony she conducted with her own hands. She remembered teaching Lily how to braid her hair, Michael how to ride his bike, Anna how to spell her name. Every achievement of theirs was a victory she claimed silently. When Robert's temper grew in his later years, frustration from failing jobs and unfulfilled dreams, Eleanor's hands still reached out first. They calmed him, held him, forgave him. She became the glue that held a cracking world together. But glue doesn't shine, it only holds others' pieces. The flashback blurred, shifting to a scene 10 years later. A kitchen filled with teenagers arguing over breakfast. Lily wanted to go to college in another state, Michael wanted to join the army, and Anna, barely 12, wanted to be left alone. Robert sat silently with his newspaper while Eleanor moved between them all, flipping pancakes, soothing tempers, solving everyone's problems but her own. That morning she had burned her hand on the frying pan. A blister rose instantly, but she said nothing. She simply wrapped it in a damp cloth and kept cooking. That small scar still marked her palm, a faint white crescent, a symbol of love's quiet wounds. The rain outside deepened, drumming harder. Eleanor turned her hand under the light, tracing that old scar with her thumb. The hands that built them, she whispered to herself. And the hands they forgot. She remembered the day Lily left for college, the pride and ache twisting inside her as she packed her daughter's last bag. Lily hugged her tightly but pulled away too soon, promising to call every week. Weeks became months. Calls became texts, then silence. Michael left next, proud, uniformed, headstrong. He sent letters for a while, but war changed him. He came home years later with distant eyes and an impatient tone whenever she spoke. Anna, the youngest, followed her siblings' footsteps, chasing dreams Eleanor didn't understand, one by one. The children she raised drifted into lives where she no longer fit. Through it all, Eleanor's hands kept moving. They wrote letters no one answered. They knitted sweaters that were never worn. They cooked meals that went cold waiting. When Robert fell ill, those hands nursed him until his final breath. His last words, "You are the strong one," echoed like both praise and punishment. Now, sitting alone decades later, she realized something cruel. She had spent her life building others, but no one had built her back. She had given every ounce of her strength, her time, her tenderness, believing love would be returned in equal measure. But love, she learned, is not always a fair trade. The kettle whistled, breaking her thoughts. She poured herself another cup of tea and watched steam curl into the dim kitchen air. Her joints ached as she lifted the cup. Each movement reminded her that her body was a timeline, every wrinkle a season of sacrifice, every scar a secret memory. She looked at her reflection in the dark window. A woman weathered? Yes, but not broken. Maybe I wasn't meant to be remembered, she murmured. Maybe I was meant to build and be forgotten. But even as she said it, something inside her rebelled. Why should the hands that created, healed, and fed everyone fade into the shadows of their success? The first chill of autumn swept through the town, carrying with it the scent of dry leaves and distant fires. Eleanor Hartley stood by her window, watching the maple tree outside shed its last golden leaves. Once, she and her children had raked that very yard together, laughing, throwing piles of leaves at each other, pretending to be carefree. But that was a lifetime ago. The yard was empty now, and so was her heart. The phone sat quietly on the kitchen counter, as if mocking her. It had been 3 months since Lily last called, 6 months since Michael's last visit, and almost a year since Anna had spoken to her properly. Her children were alive, busy, successful, thriving, and yet to Eleanor they might as well have been ghosts. She wasn't angry at first. She understood that life moved fast. People got caught up in careers, marriages, and raising their own children. But as the years passed, the excuses grew weaker. Sorry, Mom, it's been a crazy week. We'll visit next holiday, I promise. You know I love you, right? She had believed those words once. Now, they sounded like rehearsed lines from a script no one truly meant. Eleanor's days had fallen into a rhythm of routine and remembrance. She woke up early, made tea, read the newspaper she barely cared about, and stared at her silent phone. Sometimes she'd scroll through her messages, birthdays, forwarded jokes, group chats filled with her children's laughter, and realize she wasn't part of any of it. They had built new worlds, and she was just a name in their contact list. Her loneliness was not the sharp kind that makes you cry. It was a dull, lingering ache, like a bruise on the soul that never healed. She remembered the night she realized just how forgotten she had become. It was her 60th birthday. She'd baked herself a small cake, lit one candle, and waited by the table, her phone in her hand. Lily had said she would try to stop by. Michael had texted, "Happy early, Mom," and Anna hadn't replied at all. By 9 o'clock, the house was dark except for the flickering flame of the single candle. Eleanor sat alone, staring at it until the wax melted down to the plate. Then she blew it out, whispering, "Happy birthday, old fool." She hadn't cried that night. Instead, something inside her quietly broke, not like glass shattering, but like a bridge slowly collapsing under too much weight. The next morning, she received a video call from Lily. The background was loud, children laughing, dishes clattering. "Mom, sorry, last night was crazy. We had a dinner party. I hope you didn't mind." Eleanor smiled and said, "Of course not, dear." Lily laughed, distracted. "Anyway, how are you holding up?" "Still keeping busy." The word stung. Busy doing what? Talking to the walls, making tea for one. But Eleanor only smiled and said, "Oh yes, always something to do." 5 minutes later, Lily said she had to go. The call ended with a blur of goodbyes and fake cheer. The silence afterward was louder than any noise. Eleanor realized then that her life had become invisible. Her existence, a background hum to everyone else's melody. She had raised 3 children, given them everything she could, time, love, youth. But now, no one even noticed her fading away. Sometimes she'd try to reach out, sending small messages asking about their lives. She didn't ask for much a visit, a letter, even a photo of the grandchildren she barely knew. But her texts went unread for days. Her calls went to voicemail. The few times they did reply, their words felt polite but distant, like talking to a stranger. Her neighbors, too, had their own lives. They waved from afar but never stopped by. The world had moved forward, leaving her behind like a forgotten page in a book no one finished reading. One evening, she sat with her old photo albums. The pictures were full of smiles, birthdays, graduations, family picnics. In every photo, she noticed the same thing. She was always in the background. Never the focus, holding the baby, cooking the meal, cleaning the mess, capturing everyone's joy. But no one ever captured hers. That realization hurt more than the loneliness itself. She had spent her entire life being there for everyone, but no one had ever truly seen her. As night fell, Eleanor walked through the empty house. touching the things that once brought her joy. The piano she had bought for Anna, the painting she made with Lily, the old army photo of Michael in uniform. Everything had meaning once. Now they were relics of love unreturned. She sat on her bed and looked at her hands again. Those hands had built, fed, and healed. But now they trembled slightly, unused and unwanted. I gave them everything, she whispered, her voice barely audible in the dark. Everything I had, and still it wasn't enough to make them stay. A tear finally escaped, the first in months, rolling slowly down her cheek. But behind that tear, something else stirred. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was the beginning of resentment. Quiet, creeping, dangerous. Eleanor realized she had spent 60 years living for others. Now, for the first time, she wondered what it might mean to live for herself, or at least to make them feel what she had felt all these years, because sometimes love doesn't turn into hate, it turns into justice. And justice, she thought, might finally make them remember the mother they had forgotten. The wind howled outside as October settled in, sharp and unforgiving. The house shivered under its weight, much like Eleanor Hartley, frail but unbroken. That night she sat at her old wooden desk, a single lamp casting a warm circle of light on a blank sheet of paper. For hours she simply stared at it. The ink pen trembled in her fingers, heavy with words buried for decades. She wasn't sure when the idea had first come to her. Perhaps the night of her lonely birthday, or maybe the moment her last call went unanswered. But now it burned inside her like a quiet storm. They needed to remember her, not with pity or guiltless nostalgia, but with the weight of truth. They needed to feel the silence they had left her in. Eleanor began to write. To my children, she started, her handwriting small and shaky. I raised you with my hands, my heart, and everything I ever was. I watched you grow. I celebrated your dreams. I forgave your mistakes. But in return, I was left behind, a chapter you all chose not to reread. Her words spilled out slowly, carefully, but each line was a blade dipped in honesty. She wrote about the nights she stayed awake waiting for their calls, the meals she cooked that went cold, the birthdays that passed in silence. She wrote of how her body aged while waiting for footsteps that never came, how her heart grew smaller each time one of them said, "Next time." Do you know what loneliness feels like? She wrote. It feels like being erased while still alive. When she finished the first letter, she sat back, her breath unsteady. It wasn't anger she felt. It was release. Years of unspoken pain had finally found their voice. But she wasn't done yet. One letter wouldn't be enough. They each needed to hear her in their own way. She reached for another sheet of paper and wrote the name Lily at the top. To Lily, her eldest, she wrote not as a mother scolding a child, but as a woman speaking to another woman. You always wanted to be free? The letter began. You said you didn't want to end up like me, tied to home, tied to duty. I never told you that you were my freedom, Lily. You were the reason I survived the years when your father worked far away, the reason I believed my life still had purpose. But now, when I see you running from me, I wonder, did I raise you to love the world so much that you forgot the one who gave it to you? She placed Lily's letter aside, eyes glassy but calm. Then she wrote to Michael, my son, my soldier. She began, the pen digging deeper into the page. You learned how to fight wars, but not how to come home. You wear your medals with pride, but you've forgotten the woman who fought her own quiet battles so you could stand tall. I don't blame you for the distance between us. I just wish you had fought for me, too. Her hand trembled when she sealed Michael's letter. She could almost hear his deep voice, polite and distant, telling her she was being dramatic. But this time, she didn't care. She wasn't writing for understanding. She was writing for truth. The final letter was for Anna, her youngest, the one who had once clung to her skirts, who had sworn she would never leave. My little dreamer. The letter read, You told me once that you wanted to be just like me, and I told you not to. I wanted you to chase life, not chores, to live boldly, not quietly. But now I see that you took my advice and forgot my love. You learned to run fast, but not to look back. By the time she finished, dawn had begun to creep through the window. The sky was bruised pink and gray, and her lamp flickered out. She sat there, surrounded by 3 sealed envelopes, feeling a strange peace wash over her. But one letter remained, an unaddressed one. She pulled a final sheet from the drawer, took a deep breath, and began again. "To whoever finds this," she wrote. "By the time you read these words, I may not be here. Do not be alarmed, for I have simply gone where silence can no longer hurt me. I am not seeking pity, nor forgiveness, only remembrance. Tell them I loved them once enough to lose myself in the process. But love, like everything, has an ending." She folded that final letter, slipped it into a plain envelope, and placed it on top of the others. Then she arranged all 4 neatly on the dining table, one for each child, and one for the world. That evening, Eleanor made her favorite tea, lit a candle, and sat by the window. She watched the last of the autumn leaves drift to the ground. Her heart was oddly light, not from joy, but from clarity. For the first time in years, she didn't wait for a phone call. She didn't hope for company. She didn't ache. She just existed, quietly, completely. When night came, she went to bed with a small smile. Outside, the storm howled again, but inside, her house felt still. The letters waited in silence, their ink drying like old wounds finally closing. And though she didn't know it yet, those pages, her words, her truth, would soon shake the very people who had forgotten her. They would read them and understand too late the pain behind her gentle voice. The mother they had forgotten was gone, but the silence she left behind would haunt them forever. The house was quieter than ever. Not the soft, comforting quiet that once came after laughter, but a stillness so deep it felt sacred. The morning sun crept through the window, landing gently on the dining table where 4 envelopes lay neatly arranged. The kettle on the stove was cold, untouched. The chair by the window sat empty. Eleanor Hartley was gone. No one knew exactly when she left, whether it was during the night or as dawn broke. But her absence was felt immediately, like a soul slipping out of a room, leaving behind only warmth that fades too quickly. 2 days passed before anyone noticed. It was a neighbor, Mrs. Givens, who first realized she hadn't seen Eleanor tending her small garden or collecting her mail. Concerned, she knocked on the door. No answer. Through the window, she saw the envelopes on the table and the untouched cup of tea beside them. Something about that stillness chilled her. She called the police. When the door was finally opened, the officers found no sign of struggle, no sign of panic, only the faint scent of lavender and the weight of unfinished stories. Eleanor's coat was missing, and so were her old walking shoes. But her letters were there, waiting. One was addressed to each of her children, Lily, Michael, and Anna. The last, unaddressed, was labeled only, "To whoever still cares." When Lily received her letter, she was at her office in the middle of a business meeting. Her assistant handed her the envelope with a trembling voice, saying, "It's from your mother. It was delivered by the police." Lily froze. For a moment, the world went silent. She excused herself, walked into her private office, and stared at her mother's handwriting. She hadn't seen it in years. Her hands shook as she opened it. The letter wasn't long, but each line tore through her heart like glass. It spoke of love, deep, selfless love, but also of pain, of years spent waiting for calls that never came. Her mother had written with a gentleness that made the truth even sharper. "You said you didn't want to be like me, Lily, but now I see that you became something far worse. Someone who forgot that love needs time, not excuses." By the time she finished reading, tears had stained the paper. For the first time in years, Lily realized how much she had taken for granted, how often she had dismissed her mother's voice, her needs, her existence. She felt a weight she could never lift again. Michael's letter reached him at home late at night. His wife found him sitting on the couch, staring at the pages, unread for nearly an hour. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "She says I fought for everyone but her." He tried to read aloud, but broke halfway through. The letter spoke of the nights Eleanor had stayed awake, praying for his safety during the war, of how she had written to him every week, even when his replies stopped coming. "You came back a hero," she wrote. But I was already invisible." Michael's chest tightened. He had always thought of himself as a good son, responsible, dutiful. But now He saw the truth. He had been polite, not loving, present, but not connected. His medals felt heavy that night, not symbols of pride, but of everything he had failed to see. Anna's letter arrived last. She had always been the emotional one, the child who swore she would never abandon her mother. When she read the familiar handwriting, she smiled sadly, expecting comfort. But what she found instead was heartbreak. "My little dreamer," the letter began, "you once promised to stay. You didn't. And I don't blame you for chasing life. I only wish, in all your dreams, you had remembered who first taught you how to dream." Anna pressed the letter to her chest and sobbed. Not the soft, graceful tears of guilt, but the kind that come from realizing it's too late to fix what's broken. She booked a ticket home that night, desperate to find her mother, to say something, anything. But when she arrived, the house was empty. The garden was overgrown, the air still. On the table, a single candle had burned itself out, its wax hardened like frozen tears. The only thing left was the final letter, the one for whoever still cares. Anna opened it with trembling hands. "If you are reading this," the letter began, "then you have found my silence. I am not gone in sorrow. I am gone in peace. I spent my life giving, and I was forgotten. But in this silence, I have found freedom. Let this house remind you of what happens when love is one-sided. It echoes until the end. I don't seek your tears. I only wanted your time. Now time is all you will have to remember." At the bottom of the letter, Eleanor had left a simple line, written in faded ink. "My revenge is not in anger. It is in absence. You will feel me in every quiet room you enter." Days later, when the three children stood together in that house for the first time in years, they couldn't bear the silence. The ticking clock sounded louder than ever. Every room carried her presence, the faint smell of her perfume, the hum of her favorite song, the letters on the table that had already rewritten their hearts. They searched for her, but she was nowhere to be found. Some said she had gone to live by the sea. Others believed she had simply walked into the woods and never returned. No one knew for certain. But one thing was clear. She had finally left on her own terms. For the rest of their lives, Lily, Michael, and Anna carried that silence with them. It crept into their laughter, haunted their successes, and whispered through every moment of peace. It was her final lesson, that love neglected becomes a ghost that never stops following you. Eleanor Hartley had raised everyone, but in the end, her silence raised their guilt, and that silence, heavy, haunting, eternal, became her perfect revenge.